TEDxLizardCreek. Everything looks great. And I'll start off by saying something I tell my son every day, which is it's going to be a good day. It's already been a good day, but it's going to be even better. It's going to be a good day. So my name is Mike Williams, and I'm a teacher, a high school teacher, and I absolutely love my job. I'm a North Carolina high school teacher, and I love my job, which in today's political climate, you may not hear so much, but I love my job. I teach in an area in northeastern North Carolina. It's Warren County. It's a community of 20,000 people. And it's a largely African-American community, a community that has the same demographics that it had back in 1877 during Reconstruction when it was known as the Black Second, home of John Hyman. And I'm part of the 2% of teachers here in America who is an African-American man. So less than 2. Yes, and I love what I do. I teach history, and my approach to history is a little different. I approach history like how a mathematician approaches like these complex equations that I have no idea how they work. I've never been good at math. But I approach it the same way, how they grapple with these complex like algorithms and things. I always struggle to understand value and place and my sense of place in this larger American story, this American equation or this larger American experiment. I was rural. I was born and raised in Warren County. That's my home. And I love being back there teaching. But I would always question and challenge the things I understood about my own family and community history, as well as the larger experience of African Americans here in the United States. Because much like many kids who grew up in the 80s, I knew slavery, I knew Martin Luther King. Very little in between. So I lived between two extremes, and so I would always question because I knew that there was so much more about our experience. And so I tended to find myself questioning, and I would do like these external questionings and always trying to figure things out, but it would also become very internal. I would always look at myself and wonder, all right, well, where's my place? Where'd I come from? Like, it's got to be more than this whole idea of being chattel, being commodified people, enslaved people. It was more than that. I had to know more. And so it's like a symbolic mirror. This is a question. The title of my talk today is Who You? And one of my former students who's here with me today, he saw it and he said, who you? Hey, hold on a second. He said, is this a typo? I said, no, it is who you. And I asked him and I said, think about it. In the rural African-American context, when someone says who you, it's not like it's a greeting. It's a challenge. It's a questioning. It's this brusque statement that challenges who you are, your value, who you. But when you turn that around and you think about yourself and you say who you, it becomes like this questioning of your worth and attempting to understand who you are. So it was who you. So that's where we're going with it. I'm talking about how my experiences kind of shape the way I approach instruction in the classroom now. Who you. All right. Timid Noski, Latin phrase. And I can tell you, this is not going to be some talk about Latin and all of that. That actually came from the movie Matrix. I was just one of those kids who I loved Matrix. I loved it. I enjoyed watching it when I was in school. But to those of you who watch Matrix, you may have recalled when Neo was going to talk to the Oracle and he walked through the kitchen and there was this sign above the door and it said, Timid Noski, know thyself, know thyself, know thyself. Something I've always thought about, but not in that way, but know thyself. And so I put it as a screensaver on my phone. I've always held on to it. But again, it goes back to that whole idea of understanding myself. So I went to my personal oracle, my oracle. And he was my grandfather. It was my grandfather. And he wasn't like the oracle in the movie because she smoked Newports and made cookies. But it was my grandfather, the man that you see in that photo right there. His name is Charlie Smith. He was a short man. He was a man of small stature but great presence. He was a man that worked and toiled his life by his hands. He lived in the sharecropping tradition, not 20 minutes away from here, in the town named after Nathaniel Macon. And he lived on the edge of a hog farm. And I remember when I was young, I would always sit beside him. And actually, the chair, the lone prop that I have up here, It's actually one of his chairs. It's a mule chair that actually I hadn't seen until my mom brought it in here this morning. But I remember going to him with my questions of value and understanding my place. And Granddaddy has these hands that look like, and if you look in the photo, you'll see this is a late photo that he took when he was taking these literacy classes to strengthen his literacy skills and his reading. And Granddaddy would go to Warrenton and do that, but I remember those hands. And they looked like they were like a composite of mahogany mixed with like this tarnished metal that was graying over it. And he had like these veins in his hands that were like these rope-like cables that were connected to this experience, this strong experience, this sharecropping experience that he toiled and worked his entire life. But I would always sit beside him on the porch. And the sun was going down, and it was a time when we were either finishing up priming tobacco or picking cucumbers. And we would sit on the porch. And much like how my son, who's here today, he sits beside me, I mimic my granddaddy. So I would sit like this. I had my back straight. Sometimes I would tap my foot, and I would always ask him, I said, Granddaddy, tell me about what life was like when you were growing up. Tell me about, did you ever go to like Harlem during the 20s? Because he was born in 1915. And from this very protective place, he would always say, son, you don't know about that. And I would keep on pressing him and asking, and he would always say, son, you don't want to know about that. And he would look off in the distance as we sat there on the porch, and the faint smell of the hog parlor mixed with honeysuckles kind of blended as we sat there for the remainder of the day. And but I didn't want to know about it, so I didn't question it. I didn't ask. It wasn't important. So I started focusing on this larger history from the third person perspective, the foundations of America, the juggernauts of history. So I did, and that's what I did. And in many ways, I sought like confirmations of who I was, like by, getting feedback from the, community of, my place. Who are you? And one of the earliest family photos that we have is this family photo. If you see right there, if I can work it, it says the needy Warren County family. I'm the little boy with the box right there with the confused face right there, questioning, wondering what's going on. All I knew was we were getting some presents. So I go and we get presents and we show up. There's a man with a camera. Next week across the newspapers, needy family. So on top of being needy and feeling like, it wasn't really important. They don't need to know about it. So I carried that and start, again, just developing this passion for history. So I would go all over Warren County and go into like these old buck barns, old houses, the hand-me-down clothes we would get. I would look at them and I would hold them and try to manipulate them and understand their place. Understand this history that was beyond mine, but it was somebody's history and it was important and it had value. And so I would look at it and I would manipulate it and allow it to saturate my senses. And I continued that way. I graduated high school. I went on to UNC Chapel Hill, went on to study law, study the foundations of our legal system, all of these things. And I found myself going from Granddaddy's porch, Granddaddy's house, to working in the courthouse, to now in the schoolhouse. And I'm standing there in front of a class of students every day in this project-based learning tradition, this complex digital environment where we have this student-centered collaborative learning which is happening and the kids are just amazing. And I'm standing there just like every historian who will tell you, we're piecing together a puzzle. All right? This puzzle, and those of you who do puzzles, my Aunt Dorothy, who's sitting here today, she used to do these amazing puzzles. But she would always start on the outside first. But I find that the puzzle that we're constantly putting together has no borders. See, it's easy to put it together when you have the borders, but it's a borderless puzzle. And it's continuing to grow, continually growing. And the reason why it's happening now more so than any other point in our history is because we're experiencing the democratization of history. A term that one of my very, very good friends who I've worked with over the years mentioned, and we talk about a lot, how there's democracy in understanding your place. Why? As country folks say, the internets, the World Wide Webs. But the internet, we have so much access to a multitude of resources where we can now reconcile this whole third-person perspective versus the first-person perspective, your family history, the value of your experience. And so it's happening. Our little kids, our kids in our classes are now in a position where they can access the things that their parents were unable to tell them or because of the pain of their experience, just reluctant to talk about. One of my favorite quotes I use in classes is that history is told by the hunter and not the lion. History is told by the victors, not the losers. And that's the history we have. And now we're at a place where we can understand it. But I'm standing there every day putting together these pieces, and I'm finding that as I'm piecing together this puzzle, I'm finding more holes than actual pieces, within the textbooks that I'm looking at. And I find that as I'm standing there in front of that class, I'm also holding these same little tattered puzzle pieces that are soaked in maybe tobacco wax and whatever else from when I was young that I used to hold when I was sitting beside Granddaddy on the porch in one of his chairs. And trying to figure out this whole idea of place and value of experience. And the irony of it all is as I look in this place, which is where I grew up in, I'm looking in faces who have the same puzzle pieces. Little kids who have the same puzzle pieces who are struggling to figure out where they are. But instead of having their images flashed across the local newspaper, they have Snapchat. They have Facebook. They have confirmations of who they are that are constantly flooding them instantaneously. Every day. Who? You. And these same kids, again, they're just like the little boy right there with the box. A little boy who, when I look at him, looks strikingly like that little boy. That little boy in that picture. That little boy who's sitting in the back of the room who will one day sit beside me and maybe a Mueller chair, if I'm so fortunate to still have this chair. But he's going to sit beside me and he's going to wonder about my granddaddy. My past. And at that point, I realized that I owe it to Alex and that beautiful woman right there, my wife, Simone. I owe it to them to be that person who says, you do want to know about your experience. Let me tell you about it. There's value in your experience. And so from that, I started pursuing opportunities outside of the restrictions of my local budget. Teachers know how professional development money is. But I started looking at opportunities. The first opportunity that I became involved with was, it was an Ancestry.com funded grant that allowed me, along with 10 teachers total, amazing teachers from North Carolina, to actually draft a curriculum that focused on the first person's perspective of history, allowing that family history to become a part of your curriculum by using a set of digital resources, Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, as well as Fold 3, which is a military record site. And the kids were able to go in and actually study a family that was from Warren County, a family that predated the Emancipation Proclamation, a family that lived through Reconstruction, all the way up until World War I. And they studied that family, how local, state, and national events actually affected that, using those three different sources in these different groups. It was an amazing experience for the kids. And the kids, as they were doing this, had some amazing discoveries. I'll tell you one. But the young lady who's right here in the picture, her name is Justice. When we talk about this idea of who you and family history, Justice was there researching the first day when we were doing one of our scaffolding workshops. And she was going through, and if you're familiar with it, they have the census enumerations, they have these death certificates, birth certificates. Well, she found a birth certificate of her grandmother, who is in the photo, Miss Austin, a death certificate of her sister. And she was able to clear up a misconception that her grandmother had for 70 years about how her sister died, just by locating a copy of a PDF, a digital version of her grandmother's sister's death certificate. Empowering, empowering, empowering. Her grandmother, who is and the reason how I have this photo is because her grandmother substitute teaches, I call it guest teaching, in our school. And so she took the death certificate and she ran down the hall. She said, Miss Williams, can I go talk to my grandmother? I said, yeah. And she went, and I had to capture the moment. Her grandma said, thank you so much. Thank you. I know. I didn't know. But the Cornerstone Project was an amazing way to reconcile this whole idea of first versus third person perspective. After then, I became involved in another opportunity that allowed me to conduct international research. The little country boy from Warren County had the opportunity to actually go and study in the UK. at the UK National Archives. This project entitled When We Were British, the North Carolina Geographic Alliance in partnership with the Virginia Geographic Alliance sent 6 North Carolina teachers and 6 Virginia teachers over to the UK to study our colonial origins. And I used the opportunity, again, to further develop my curriculum in the class. But I also pursued an opportunity to study the transatlantic slave trade. Again, remember the extremes. We had the extreme of slavery and we had the extreme of I have a dream. And so I started feeling that end of it, the front end of it, and studying, and my research centered on a place called Cape Coast Castle, which is located in Accra, Ghana. And I analyzed it from this geospatial perspective where I studied the different layers of the place and looked at how economics and culture and religion and all these different elements affect the daily operations of this one place on the professional side. But on the personal side, I began to center on this door. This door is known as the door of no return. It was the last place that slaves saw before they were taken across the Atlantic. Whether it was to Barbados for the sugarcane trade, or whether it was Brazil, which is where my wife was born, or whether it's to Chesapeake or Charleston. And the thing about it is when I looked at it, I was thinking, who you, how does this fit in? And I began to think about it and realize that this was the last place. When I say who you, this is a part of that who you analysis. This was the last place that our name was truly, truly spoken. Before they were taken away, and it came back to who you. So as I'm flying back across the Atlantic, I had a number of different feelings that were flooding me. One of which was fever and a bunch of other stuff. I had the flu, which is a bad time during the Ebola craze when you're flying internationally with the flu. And my wife thought I had to be in quarantine when I came home. But I came back and it was an amazing sense of empowerment, a sense of purpose. And with purpose comes a calling. And a wise man once said that your job is what you're paid for, your calling is what you're made for. And I have a sense of what my calling is. My calling now is to be a better teacher, a teacher who's empowering students even more above and beyond, to be a better person, to be a knowledgeable person. A person who's able to reconcile the first versus the third person perspective. Who you? I'm a teacher. And I love this calling. I haven't been called to make necessarily money. I've been called to make a difference. And so I ask you all, who you? Thank you.